Biological Code Podcast, a podcast on Germanische Heilkunde. Today we're talking about eye cancer. Yuri and Juliana had learned Germanische Heilkunde and knew Dr. Hammer very well. They were around 60 years old and lived on a large farm in Hungary. Together, they tried to give all their animals, goats, sheep, horses, donkeys, dogs, cats, and all their poultry, the best conditions they possibly could. Before long, they would even have a little piglet. The couple loved their animals deeply. Whenever a goat or a sheep had a difficult birth, especially with twins or triplets, Juliana would quickly carry the newborns into the living room, warm them up, and return them to their mother as soon as possible. She had always felt strong compassion for animals, especially whenever one needed extra care. Feeding the animals and milking the goats, however, had always been Yuri's responsibility. The animals had plenty of space and were generally in good condition. Even the veterinarian had remarked on one occasion, "Strange, I never have to come to your place." Of course we know why. As part of their daily life, Juliana and Yuri regularly took walks with their animals. One day, Yuri decided he would really like to own a cow, and so they bought a little female calf and named her Sharika. She quickly became part of the family, and Yuri would often take her for a walk. Before long, Sharika had grown into a full-sized cow and had a visit with the bull. She was now pregnant with her first calf. She lived mostly among the sheep and goats. During feeding times, she and the horses would be separated, but afterward they were all brought back together. A friend of the family had come to the farm, asking whether they might have extra space for a small pony. Thinking of their grandchildren, who visited regularly, Yuri and Juliana agreed, but the so-called pony turned out to be a fully grown gelding, not small at all. When animals live together for a long time, and a new animal arrives, there can be trouble until the hierarchy and territorial issues are sorted out. The gelding wanted to take over leadership among the herd and sometimes even got into a fight with Sharika. The gelding didn't realize that a 500-kilogram cow could be a real threat to him. Since becoming pregnant, Sharika's appetite had noticeably increased. As she was now male-perceiving and therefore more territorial, she had also become more defensive during feeding time. Hay was stored in the loft, which made feeding simple. In the barn, the animals could be fed individually in their boxes, where the outdoor areas were large, giving every animal space to move freely. The barn was a fair distance from the family's house. One morning, the gate bell rang unusually early, which woke Juliana. A man spoke through the intercom. "What is this about?" she asked. "It's about a horse," he said. "I'm here to collect it." "What horse?" she asked again. She let him in and saw a closed transporter drive towards the barn. A man who worked on their farm was clearly expecting the transporter. Alarmed, Juliana phoned her husband. "Yuri, what's going on?" Yuri explained that something terrible had happened during the night. Sharika had injured the gelding so severely with her horn that he couldn't survive. The cow and the gelding must have fought over food, and Sharika had not tolerated the gelding's dominant behavior. The farm worker had found the horse in the morning, and the transporter had been called to remove the body. The news struck Juliana like lightning from a clear sky. The gelding had been with them only for a few days, but she had already grown deeply fond of him. But Sharika was also dear to her. Yuri and the worker came inside, wanting to explain exactly what had happened, but Juliana stopped them immediately. "Don't tell me where he was lying," she said. "I don't want to know. I don't want any details." They now needed to decide what to do about Sharika, as she could pose a risk to the other horses and to the donkey. Since they couldn't keep the animals separated, Yuri took the cow the same day to the village dairy barn. But Juliana remained extremely distressed. She was restless and could only manage to walk as far as the stables because she didn't want to see the courtyard. For an entire week, she couldn't bring herself to visit the animals. For days she repeated, "I don't want to see him, not even the place where he lay." She forbade everyone to tell her anything about it, because she did not even want to imagine the injured pony. She struggled for days to process it. She was clearly conflict active. To this day, She still does not know where it happened. However, having a farm, life forces you to move forward, and 2 weeks later, the first piglets of the year were born, and they needed constant care. During that time, Juliana and Yuri also visited Sharika in the dairy barn. They saw she was comfortable and well cared for, not in the same way as she would be on their farm, of course, but Juliana was at peace with their decision. The piglets were also a good distraction for Juliana, and she found some relief in thinking that this incident was part of nature, and life on a farm isn't always rosy, or how we want it to be. Slowly she came to terms with the incident, and she resolved her conflict. A few days later, she noticed a blurriness in her vision, and her left eye became increasingly sensitive when she wore contact lenses. Each day, the sensitivity grew worse, and changing lenses didn't help. The blurriness increased from the corner of her eye inward, and eventually a stabbing pain and burning began. This continued for several days, until she woke one night, realizing that the burning had become a serious problem. All around her eye, she was in pain and could see only blurred shapes. She could even no longer close her eye. Because of the severity, she contacted an eye doctor that she already knew. The doctor examined her eye and explained that the front chamber of the eye was inflamed. The assistant placed her hand gently on Juliana's shoulder and said, "Oh, you poor thing." The doctor said that the inflamed cells had increased the eye pressure, that part of the pupil was blocked, and they feared it might never recover. They recommended an immediate steroid injection into the eye. If they would wait another day, it would already be too late, they said, and she might lose her vision in that eye. Juliana asked for a few minutes to think. She was always afraid of injections, so the idea was out of the question for her. But her eye hurt. It burned, and she felt truly unwell. While still at the clinic, Juliana called Dr. Hammer and explained her situation. Dr. Hammer asked her directly, "What was the thing you didn't want to see, my dear Juliana? A picture or image you wanted to avoid?" Immediately she thought of the situation with Sharika and the gelding. Because she understood Germanische Heilkunde, she knew she was in a healing phase. And so Juliana made her decision. No injection. When the eye doctor returned to her, he expressed regret that Juliana had refused the injection and so instead prescribed steroid drops along with a pupil dilating agent and a glaucoma medication. He also scheduled a follow-up examination, but Juliana already knew she would not begin any therapy. She was thinking about her biological conflict. Back home, Juliana put the drops aside and waited. She used natural eye drops, cooled the eye, and tried to get as much rest as possible. She did not go to the follow-up appointment. After some days, the pressure and pain eased off. The cloudiness gradually lifted, and eventually she felt fully recovered. What exactly happened according to the 5 biological laws? Juliana had suffered a biological conflict when she learned that the cow fatally injured her pony. Even though she hadn't seen the animal, the mental picture alone triggered a visual morsel conflict. She absolutely did not want to see the pony after it had been fatally injured. The conflict had been dramatic, unexpected, and in perceived isolation, meeting all 3 criteria for a biological conflict. In her case, the choroid of the left eye reacted, an area controlled by the brainstem. With the brainstem, it follows the rule right side morsel in and left side morsel out. As it was her left eye that was affected, it indicated that she had wanted to get rid of the visual morsel, namely, the image of the fatally wounded horse. From the moment of the DHS, she was conflict active, thinking about the situation day and night, unable to go to the animals. In this brainstem-controlled biological special program, the choroid thickens in the active phase, forming a so-called choroidal melanoma. Medically, that term is not quite correct, but this is how it is known. A couple of weeks later, when the many piglets were born, Juliana resolved her conflict. The conflict active phase was around 20 days. The fact that Sharika had been given away immediately also helped her overcome the conflict by helping to prevent getting on track. Each time she would have seen the cow, she would have been reminded of the terrible event. Juliana and Yuri had acted instinctively and wisely, and so now her healing symptoms in the eye began. The choroid thickening sometimes medically mislabeled as choroid melanoma, began to break down. Mycobacteria assist in the healing phase, which naturally created inflammation and swelling. This can be diagnosed as eye cancer. In the middle of the healing phase comes the crisis, in which the pain briefly subsides. For Juliana, this was exactly after 10 days of symptoms. From the crisis onward, the symptoms weakened, and after another 10 days, Juliana's eye was fully restored to how it was before. When her eye was fully restored, Juliana then phoned the eye doctor for a follow-up appointment. The doctor scolded her over the phone for missing the earlier appointment and asked who would take the responsibility if something serious was now found. Juliana reassured the doctor that everything was fine and that she would take responsibility herself anyway. But the follow-up exam showed her eye had completely healed. When asked whether she was still using the drops, Juliana explained she had never opened them and handed them back. The doctor was almost speechless and wrote in the report, "On her own responsibility, no medication and no examinations." Since then, Juliana has worn her contact lenses again without any problems. She's grateful she knows Germanische Heilkunde. Neither symptoms nor diagnosis frighten her anymore, because Germanische Heilkunde helps her understand what is happening in her body. Dr. Hammer was once more proven to be right. This knowledge actually belongs in primary school so that we can all understand the biology of our bodies. At least the basics of how the body works should be known to everyone. Learn to think biologically. The knowledge of Germanische Heilkunde belongs in every household. If you'd like to learn how to apply the 5 biological laws in everyday life, visit thebiologyproject.org. You can also find more about our association at urkraftleben.at. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to subscribe. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Telegram, and Instagram. Thank you for listening. Until next time.